Number 1. First, some backstory. I'm female, and I was 22 years old at the time. It was the day after Valentine's Day, and I'd just found out the guy I was seeing was cheating on me. A co-worker and I decided to grab some drinks at our favourite bar after work. We dropped my car off at home, which was 5 minutes away. We were having a great time, and this cute guy was sitting near us, and seemed to be alone. Figuring how I was newly single, I decided that I would chat him up. He was nervous and seemed shy, and we invited him over to sit with us. He was a bit socially awkward, but he seemed harmless. We got to talking about what we did for work. He told us he was a parole officer, and also helped the local police at times. He'd loosened up a bit, and he seemed alright. So, after a while, my co-worker wanted to leave, and the guy said he could give me a ride to my apartment. I was a bit uneasy, but I did only live around the corner, and he seemed nice. So she left, and we continued to talk. All of a sudden, his face turned into what I can only describe as shit your pants scary, as he proceeded to tell me that I needed to be careful because there was a serial rapist on the loose that they were looking for. Oh, okay, thanks, I said. Well, shit, I thought I'd certainly be safe with this shy, nervous and socially awkward guy who didn't even seem to fit the job he just got finished telling me he did. But instead of listening to my alarm bells, I took him up on his ride home. I was too drunk to walk, and cell phones didn't exist back then, so I thought it's only 5 minutes away. We get to my apartment, and as I'm getting out of the car, he asks if he can use my bathroom. I tell him no, my roommate is there, and I don't bring people she doesn't know into our home. He kept asking and getting irritated, and my alarm bells go off, and they're screaming at me to get the hell away from him. The front door to the complex is locked, and you have to be buzzed in, or you're shit out of luck. I take my key, and I have it ready to go as I quickly unlock the door. At this point, I decide to make a run for it, full on sprint mode like Jackie Joyner Kersey. I caught him off guard, and had a good head start on him as he began to chase me. I shoved that key in the door, and I slammed it shut behind me, and booked it to the stairs as if my life depended on it. I could hear him banging on the door as I got to the stairs. I ran all the way up 5 flights of stairs into my apartment, and I locked the door, sat down, and cried as my roommate stared at me in horror. I didn't leave the apartment for 4 days, and I realized he was likely the serial rapist that he was talking about in his own story. I never went back to that bar again. Number 2. I'm a 27-year-old male. This happened when I was in 5th grade, so I must have been about 11 years old. The whole idea of paedophiles and kids being abducted wasn't a hugely publicized deal back then. Well, at least not as much as it is now. We lived above a bar that was very busy every night. Most of the people were nice, and sometimes they would buy us a can of soda or something, but nothing weird or dangerous ever went on. Not that I'm aware of, at least. We lived on a busy street though, so we weren't really allowed to leave the block, so most of the time we were stuck out in the backyard. Anyway, I'm 11, my brother Josh is 9, and my cousin Christy was 11 as well. We were trying to play hide and seek, but it was limited. We were sort of used to the bar customers coming out of the back door and going to their car, or vice versa. Nobody ever said more than hi though, and they left us alone. Well, one chick, who was probably in her 40s, comes up to us and asks what we're doing. We tell her we're playing hide and seek, and that it was my brother's turn. My brother was very small for his age due to lead paint, so he looked like he was about 5 or 6. She comes over to us, picks him up, and puts him in an empty trash can, one of those with the lid and the locking handles. We're freaking out and trying to get him out, and ended up having to push the trash can over, since neither of us were tall enough to lift him out. We run up the stairs screaming for my mum, and we tell her what happened. My neighbour's daughter, Carrie, was there. I was madly in love with this girl, or infatuated, or whatever. But either way, I had a crush on this girl for a long time, and here she was, talking with my mum. She was about 16 at the time, I think. Anyway, we decide to play in the entry room to the apartment instead. It has the doors to each apartment, and it was basically a large laundry room. A couple of hours go by, and all of a sudden, this bitch shows up again, literally out of nowhere. Apparently, she made note of us going back up the stairs, and remembered it later in her drunken stupor. Josh and Chrissy run inside, but when I got up, I twisted my ankle, and so this chick grabs my arm and tries to pull me out the door. My neighbour comes running out, and her daughter grabs my other arm and starts pulling. So I've got a drunk chick trying to haul my ass out of the door for no apparent reason, and my childhood crush trying to save my life. It was like magic. Carrie pulled my arm, made the chick stumble, and then punched her in the mouth as hard as she could. Next thing I knew, Carrie had her arms around me, trying to comfort me. So I guess it wasn't all bad. But anyway, I still had to go to the doctors because my arm was all frued up. The next week, this chick came by with the police, and apparently had a much different story to tell than we did. She somehow thought that Carrie and I were going to have to pay for her hospital bills, and said that if we did, she wouldn't press charges. Well, there were 3 kids, a teenager, and 2 adult witnesses that told the cops a different story about a drunk woman trying to abduct a kid. The tone of that conversation changed, and I was taken down to the station with my mum and stepdad so I could answer some questions. I don't remember anything ever coming of it. Too long didn't read? I was almost taken by a drunk woman, but my childhood crush turned into Xena warrior princess and heroically saved my arse. Number 3.
This story happened almost 2 years ago. I was 19, and one of my best friends had just moved to Tennessee. While I was pretty upset about her move, she was only about a 4-hour drive away, so I made every effort to visit as often as I could. Summer was drawing to a close, and I was about to have to start back to college. On top of that, I was having some pretty frustrating boy troubles. This kinda made the perfect storm for me to feel reckless. I had taken this kind of fuck it attitude about everything. I just wanted to have some fun. My friend was loving this change of attitude. She's a bold, crass, and sometimes aggressive lesbian, in stark contrast to myself, usually a very sweet, reserved, and shy goody-goody. My friend Kate always loves to say, do, or force me into situations that push me to loosen up and go outside my comfort zone. This is due to equal parts of her wanting me to live life to the fullest, and her getting a real kick out of watching me fumble, be awkward, and get embarrassed. Needless to say, she wanted to take full advantage of this rare spark of reckless abandon in me, so she suggested that we go to her favorite gay club. Being a shy goody-goody, I had never been to any sort of club. All I ever seemed to hear about from the girls that did go was how rude or aggressively flirtatious the men at the clubs could be, and that made me nervous. But I reasoned to myself that this would be a gay club, and none of the men there would be interested in me. I'd have my chance to dance as much as I wanted, without any unwanted creeps trying to dry hump me on the dance floor. And if by chance a girl wanted to dance, at least it wouldn't be so scary. And although I myself might not be a lesbian, I would certainly appreciate the attention. In my head, it was a win-win situation, so I eagerly agreed, and even suggested that she bring her gay friends that she had made in that state. They were 2 boys who attended the college in the neighboring city, and she had talked about them a lot, and I was excited to meet them. Soon we were driving to pick up the only one of her friends able to make it, Jim. I don't know if it's because she didn't expect me to actually agree, or what, but during the car ride, her attitude changed. She started to warn me that there were still some gross people that went to this club, and even though I was a straight girl, I should still stick with the group and be careful who I talked to. I waved it away at first, not wanting to get my spirits dampened. I had been so stressed lately, and I really needed this. But after we picked Jim up and started to the club, he soon chimed in, agreeing with Kate. He said some real weirdos came in from time to time, and they'd go after anything with legs. But the prospect of a night partying sounded too good to all of us, and we reasoned that the weirdos probably wouldn't be there since we were going in the middle of the week nowadays. To better understand the events of the evening, you need to know about Jim. He was a very gentle, sweet boy who had not yet come out to his family. This was understandable, as he explained how deeply Southern his family was. They were an old family with old money, and very highly esteemed in their small town. Now that I think about it, that's what Jim reminded me of, the ideal Southern lady, docile, polite, and soft-spoken, with big beaming eyes, blonde hair, and a genuine good-natured smile. He was more timid than even I usually was. He was the sort of person who inspired fondness and a desire to protect. Too pure for this world, Kate would say. To further put his and Kate's minds at ease, I proposed a sort of buddy system. If a guy started to hit on Jim that he wasn't comfortable with, I would pretend to be his girlfriend. And if a girl started to hit on Kate that she didn't like, I would pretend to be her girlfriend. And I would go to whoever was closest if anyone started to hit on me. We all agreed, and soon we were at the club. We arrived fairly early, and we were there for several hours, dancing, mingling, and watching the drag show, and everything was going great, until Kate decided to go up to the roof for a cigarette. Not wanting to separate, and almost in need of some fresh air, Jim and I went with her. We found a quiet corner on the somewhat crowded roof, and Jim and I talked excitedly about the people we had flirted and danced with. But then I noticed, or felt rather, a brooding, tense feeling from Kate. I looked at her to see her eyes narrowed and arms folded across her chest, taking slow, deliberate drags on her cigarette. I know my friend's dramatic antics enough to know that she was doing her best to look intimidating and mean, even though she's 5'4" and dressed in neon. But this was different somehow. Like I said, I can feel this energy coming off her. Had she been an animal, her hackles would have been raised and her teeth bared, and it made my arms break out in goosebumps. She was leaning with her back against the railing, and Jim and I were facing her, our backs to the crowd. She was glaring at someone behind us. "What is it?" I asked, starting to turn. "Don't," she hissed, and I froze. I glanced at Jim, who had a confused and uncomfortable smile on his face while his head was cocked at her. Still never taking her eyes off of whatever was behind us, she said, "Be cool. There's a man. I really don't like the way he's watching us." She must have seen my eyes widen, because she continued, "Come lean next to me. Act natural." I shoved my hands in my pockets and turned to lean on the rail, crossing my feet in front of me, trying to seem as relaxed as possible. Jim angled himself outward and pretended to scan the crowd casually. "Where is he?" he asked, and I noticed a small, nervous smile on his face. I spotted him before Kate had to point him out. In the bustling throng of people coming up to the roof, going down to the dance floor, mingling and laughing and talking, one figure stood absolutely still. I instinctively glanced away when I saw he really was staring directly at us. I made myself look back at him, and began to feel more uneasy. I always thought that creeps at the club like this would come in deceptive disguises, like very handsome and charming men, or flirty or enticing women, but this man was the most stereotypical creep I had ever seen. He was older, 45 through 55, and severely balding. He even had that stupid sparse comb-over with the hair grown out on the sides of his head. He had large, thick glasses and a mustache, and he sported that standard creeper tan windbreaker as well. If I hadn't been so unnerved by the intensity of his stare, I might have laughed. He looked like a damn cartoon character. This guy couldn't possibly be for real. But there he was, standing perfectly still in the middle of a bustling crowd, not even attempting to hide the fact that he was watching us. I suddenly felt exposed, so I pushed off the rail and turned my back to him again, no longer able to stand looking at him. Jim followed suit, and we closed in tighter as a group, trying to make jokes about him and laugh it off, but Kate never took her eyes off him, or said a word. Jim and I tried to change the subject and forget about the weirdo, and apparently he had moved on, because soon Kate even rejoined the conversation, lighting another cigarette. I was just starting to relax again, when I looked up and my laughter died in my throat. He had moved around, and was working his way along the railings towards us, slowly, eyes locked on us. He didn't even blink, not even when our eyes met, and he had to have seen the sudden panic in my eyes. He reminded me of a cat stalking birds. I swallowed hard, but Kate dragged me out of my frightened trance by grabbing my arm and urging me to come in closer, closing our small circle even tighter. She rotated us so that she was the one with her back to him, and began talking loudly. If he was going to try to approach us, she was going to try and block him out.
Hey there.
He had not raised his voice, had even spoken calmly, but it cut through our conversation like a knife. I couldn't help it. I looked up at him. He was standing very close to Jim and Kate's shoulders, smiling a wide, friendly smile. His smile was so wide, it made his bulging eyes look beady and glinting, and I shuddered. Kate turned around to face him fully, drawing herself up and giving him what I know to be the death glare, but still none of us spoke. Even Jim wasn't smiling anymore.
You kids smoke?
He continued cheerily, reaching into one of his coat pockets. I glanced at Kate, who answered by taking a drag of her cigarette and blowing the smoke as close to him as she could without actually blowing it in his face. He smiled even wider, and I folded my arms defensively.
I have these nice cigarettes here,
he continued, drawing out a carton.
All natural, wonderful taste,
he says, opening the carton. Oh no, we don't smoke, Jim said hurriedly. At that point, I noticed that he had folded his arms as well. Although he was clearly uncomfortable, he was still trying his best to be polite. Big mistake.
Oh no?
The man asked, his eyes lighting up and turning his full attention to Jim.
These really aren't bad for you.
He was still taking out a cigarette, in spite of Jim's quiet, no thank yous. Kate spoke up, her voice harsh. We're good, man. Thanks. She turned her back to him again, and Jim turned with her. That should have been anyone's cue to back off, but not this guy. I saw his smile waver, and then he calmly placed the cigarette back into its box. I tried my best not to look at him and to focus on what Kate and Jim were saying, but he wasn't going away. I watched him move and stand even closer to Jim. He was almost speaking into his ear when he asked,
So are you gay?
Jim started and turned slightly. In his attempts to regain personal space, he opened the circle, and the man promptly inserted himself into the slight gap. Jim went red, and his panic was evident as his eyes darted around and he stammered. Barely thinking, I reached out and grabbed his hand, giving it a squeeze. He looked down, and then back at me, and his sudden relief and understanding made him jittery. No, he laughed nervously, and I made myself smile at the man. No, this is my girlfriend. We're here together. The man looked at our hands, then let his eyes slowly travel up to meet mine. His smile was still there, but it no longer reached his eyes, and his tone was almost sinister.
Oh, really?
Suddenly, I felt this cold sting of fear in my stomach heat up and smolder into quiet anger. Really, I said, in what I hope was a cutting, flat tone. Over a year now. Running with the spark of defiance, I dropped Jim's hand and moved in closer to him, wrapping my arms around his waist. He draped his arm over my shoulders, and I could feel his nervousness and how tightly he gripped my arm. Once again, this man ignored his cue to leave, asking us all sorts of prying questions about our relationship. With every question, my confidence fell. I know he sensed it, because he began to get arrogant.
Wow,
He drawled.
two attractive young people like you must have all sorts of fun. Wild nights partying, here and at home. It must get pretty intense. You guys like to try new things?
He shuffled a little closer, and my resolve left me. Jim and I both just stared at him, leering at us. I now was clutching his waist as tightly as he was clutching onto my arm. Thankfully, Kate had had enough. "That's none of your business, buddy," she growled, pushing us back so that she was between us and the man again. She got right up in his face, daring him to say something else. He was slightly surprised, and backed up a little, muttering something like,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Kate kept nudging us backwards, until she turned around and grabbed me by my sleeve, effectively towing us behind her as she marched downstairs. I turned my head once to see the man, once again, the lone still figure in the crowd, staring after us. He wasn't smiling anymore. We instinctively made our way to the most crowded room in the club, the dance floor. At first we just stood against the wall, talking in urgent tones about how awful and creepy that was. But soon a very smooth and attractive guy sidled up to Jim, and after a brief discussion asked him to dance. Cheering him on playfully, we watched him shyly follow the stranger out onto the dance floor. The song changed to one I liked, and wanting to take back my night of fun, I struck out on my own dance. I urged Kate to join as well, and pointed out a confident-looking girl also dancing alone. Soon I had forgotten all about the creeper, dancing till my feet hurt and sweat made my hair stick to my face. But it all came to a screeching halt when suddenly my hand was snatched out of the air, and I opened my eyes to see a panicked Jim holding onto it and looking behind him desperately. My heart sank, and when I followed his gaze, sure enough, there was Creeper Man, not very far away, looking agitated and staring at Jim. I stopped my dancing dead, and when he saw both of us staring at him, he made a quick glance around and, hunching over slightly, moved behind a pillar along the edge of the room. I looked up at Jim to find him nearly in tears. He was breathing hard and squeezing my hand so hard I was losing feeling in my fingers. I grabbed his face with my free hand and gently made him look away from the pillar where the man had hidden himself, and at me. "What happened?" I demanded, my concern for this poor boy overpowering my own rising unease. Jim told me that he had been dancing when he felt a sudden hand slide up his stomach and across his chest from behind. He thought it was the attractive guy he had been dancing with, but then he saw that guy was still dancing in front of him, not paying attention. He had turned to find the Creeper Man pressing himself against him and breathing heavily. When Jim jerked away and turned to face him, Creeper Man advanced, a crazed look in his eye, reaching for Jim again. Jim had run then, searching frantically for me or Kate. He said the man started to chase after him, but then he spotted me and ran over, and turned to find the man stopped dead in his tracks. We both looked back to where the man was hiding, to see him standing halfway out from behind the pillar, looking at us over his glasses, and obviously breathing heavily through his mouth. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "That's it," I said, turning and power walking away, dragging Jim behind me. "Party's over." I found Kate and pulled her away from her dance partner. She was angry until I explained what was happening. Then she was furious. I dragged them both towards the exit, both looking around for the man. Jim out of fear, and Kate out of rage. When we were outside in the open, and the door closed, muffling the loud music, I finally felt like I could breathe again. It was a straight shot down to my car. We had gotten a pretty good spot because we had gotten there so early. Jim started to cry, and I could feel him shaking. I felt tears prick behind my eyes too, but I forced them down. I wasn't going to let my guard down until we were safely out of there. But my stomach dropped when I heard the sound of the door open and the music blare out behind us. I started walking faster, snatching my keys out of my purse and fumbling to have them ready. I heard a quiet, "Oh my God," from Jim, and he grabbed my hand again, using his other hand to stifle his renewed sobs. I risked a glance over my shoulder to see Creeper Man making hurried, purposeful strides towards us, still breathing heavily and not saying anything. I hesitated, unsure of whether to make a run for it or turn and attack this crazy, disgusting asshole. But Kate placed her hand in the middle of my back and gave me a firm push, growling, "Go." One look into her eyes, and I knew she wouldn't have to tell me twice. She fell back from us and turned to start advancing towards the man. I could hear profanities bouncing off the buildings and ringing down the street as she started screaming at him. I picked up my pace, jogging the rest of the way and ushering Jim into the back seat as quickly as I could. I closed the door after him and whipped around to see Kate still screaming and shoving the man roughly. She even knocked his glasses off. Suddenly, feeling unbelievably stupid, I remembered I had pepper spray in my purse. I ran back towards Kate and scrambled desperately trying to find it. When my hand finally closed on it, I stopped and called out to Kate. I urged her to come on and to get in the car so we could go. Creeper Man looked past Kate and at me, and I held up the spray. "If you try anything, you'll be eating this," I shouted. I could hear my own voice shaking, but we both knew that I meant it. The man backed away from Kate, and she bucked at him one last time, making him flinch. She turned and walked back towards me, but I didn't turn or lower the spray until she had passed me and was urging me to follow her. Looking flustered and worried, the man picked up his glasses and put them back on, before ducking his head down, shoving his hands into his pockets, and hurrying up the sidewalk in the opposite direction. Kate and I both turned and ran the rest of the way back to the car, and I peeled out of there. I couldn't speak for the rest of the night. I drove us home in silence, not even speaking when we walked Jim back to his dorm room. After he was safely inside, Kate just turned around and hugged me, and I finally cried too. That was a night I will never forget. I'm afraid my clubbing days are over for good.
Number 4. Not much backstory is necessary for this encounter. My friends and I are pretty much your standard college guys, and with last night being a Friday, we went out to the bars on Main Street, as opposed to the college bars located close to campus. We were in a group of about 10, which started to dwindle as the night went on, and as the bars began to close, it was only me and 2 of my housemates left. 2 o'clock strikes. We depart from the bar and we indulge by visiting the hot dog stand. By all measures, this night was turning out to be a great one. We make our way down Main Street and get closer to our house. When we're about 3 blocks away from home, a woman crosses the street in front of us and begins to engage in what seems to be your standard drunken chit-chat. At first, nothing was particularly weird about it. She was probably around 25 years old and dressed normally, and seemed nice enough. The first red flag was the fact that she was clearly a few months pregnant and had a noticeable baby bump. She was definitely not drunk, and she was coming from the opposite direction of the bars. On top of that, she clearly noticed us from a distance and went out of her way to cross the street and intercept us. As we stand there talking, she apparently decided to focus her attention on me, and she begins to get slightly physical in a flirtatious way. This wasn't unwelcome at first, and I kind of just roll with it, to the glee of my friends. However, it gets unacceptable pretty quickly, as she pushes herself up against me, and her hands wander a little too far. She then accuses me of being her baby daddy, which one of the guys found particularly humorous. Apparently, he cracked some kind of joke which she found to be objectionable, and this is where things really begin to escalate. She walks up to him and presses her forearm up against his throat as she backs him into the side of the building that we're next to. She mutters things along the lines of, "Oh, that's funny to you, is it?" She then grabs him by the throat and continues to utter similar statements, which is when I feel the need to step in, because my buddy is clearly very uncomfortable and isn't sure how to respond to what's going on. My other roommate is wisely standing about 5 feet back from us, detached from what's going on. I walk up to her and separate them, telling her to get the fuck off him, or I'll be forced to call the police. She then looks me in the eyes with this heinous glare, and says, "If you call the cops, I'll tell them you raped me." I tell my friends we're getting the hell out of there, and we begin to walk away, but she follows us. I again tell her to leave us alone or I'm calling the cops, a threat which she clearly doesn't respond well to, because this time she rebuttals with, "What, you're scared of a girl? I'll follow you home, burn down your house, and kill you." At this point, we decide we're just going to book it home and get inside, so we take off running. Thankfully, we easily gain distance on her. We watch out of the front window as she wanders down our street and past our house, seemingly not knowing where we went or that we even live here. However, she stops a block away from our house and begins talking to a couple who are outside. They appear to agree to walk her home and cross back in front of our house to go in the other direction. They stop a block away from our house and she goes inside an apartment building. She definitely wasn't drunk and wasn't obviously on drugs. I know that being pregnant doesn't magically keep a person from engaging in those activities, but it does make drugs less likely. I wonder what her intentions were, because she definitely sought us out and started the confrontation. She threw the rape accusation out there without hesitation, and that terrifies me. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Firstly, a big thank you to Urmaker for his help on this one. It was a really long story and must have been a real bastard to record. So yeah, big thanks. And make sure to check out his channel if you haven't already. He basically makes a horror video every day almost. I mean, the man's like part machine, I don't know how he does it. But it's all good stuff, so make sure to check him out, yeah. Speaking of checking out, make sure to check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe or I'll come and find you. And you'll hear from me again very, very soon. Stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.